Welcome to the Maryland Planners course, which introduces the Maryland Plan Development Process, a comprehensive system planners use to develop emergency and disaster plans in Maryland. This online self-study is the first part of the two-part course, which also includes 2 days of classroom interaction and is scheduled for a future date. This course will prepare planners to develop plans for a wide array of threats and hazards impacting their community. This self-paced portion of the course will prepare students for the classroom portion of the course. The Maryland Planners course has 3 basic modules. Module 1 introduces the basic components of the Maryland Plan Development process through this online self-study. Module 2, conducted in the classroom, delves deeper into the process and includes a series of collaborative activities that reinforce the concepts presented in Module 1. Finally, Module 3 presents a number of tips, tricks, and resources that planners use to facilitate the planning process in their communities. Module 1 includes 4 sections that walks students through the Maryland Plan Development process. These sections cover topics including the basis for planning, plan types, developing a plan, and navigating the planning process. Section 1, Doctrines and Principles. This section presents the fundamental concepts and doctrine behind the Maryland Plan Development process. Specifically, this section familiarizes planners with the manner in which doctrine guides and informs planning and presents principles of planning and their application. The Maryland Plan Development process is based on accepted doctrine and best practices from all levels of government. It is important that planning aligns horizontally across all levels of government and is based on the same underlying premises and assumptions. At the heart of the Maryland Plan Development process is the National Preparedness Goal. The National Preparedness Goal outlines the nation's approach to preparing for threat hazards and reducing impacts. The National Preparedness Goal lays the groundwork for fundamental planning efforts in communities across the United States. As stated, the National Preparedness Goal is a secure and resilient nation with the capabilities required across the whole community to prevent, protect against, mitigate, respond to, and recover from the threats and hazards that pose the greatest risk. As noted, the National Preparedness System is the instrument the nation employs to build, sustain, and deliver core capabilities to achieve the goal of a secure and resilient nation. The underlying goal behind the National Preparedness System is strengthening all communities in the United States through integrated preparedness efforts. Whole community is the approach to emergency management that reinforces the fact that FEMA is only one part of the nation's emergency management team, that we must leverage all of the resources of our collective team in preparing for, protecting against, responding to, recovering from, and mitigating against all hazards, and that collectively we must meet the needs of the entire community in each of these areas. Effective planning ensures that the whole community is represented and involved in the planning process. Understanding the composition of the population and including considerations to meet the population needs must occur from the outset of the planning effort. This includes planning for the people with disabilities and others with functional and access needs, including people with physical accessibility or language requirements, children, and people who use service animals, among others. The most realistic and complete plans are prepared by a diverse planning team, including representatives from the jurisdiction's departments and agencies, businesses and organizations such as civic, social, faith-based, humanitarian, educational, advocacy, and professional groups, all of which contribute critical perspectives and/or have a role in executing the plan. The whole community approach should be used to conduct effective community-based emergency planning. Incorporating feedback and methods from across service sectors and the public ensures comprehensive planning, the smart use of resources, and provides an understanding of community capabilities. It is very important to consider how to incorporate all members of the community into your planning process. While it may not be realistic to include everyone, there are ways to reach the community through outreach efforts and inclusion in the plan review. Regardless of the specific involvement in the planning process, the plan must consider all members of the community, ensuring that the public is safe throughout all phases of a disaster. While the causes of emergencies vary greatly, many of the effects do not. Planners can address common operational functions and required capabilities in a general plan. Instead of having unique plans for every type of threat or hazard, planning for all threats and hazards ensures that when addressing emergency functions, planners determine capabilities and identifying common tasks and roles for accomplishing the tasks. For example, regardless of the type of disaster, the resource management process remains the same. Whether you are supporting the incident with search and rescue teams or law enforcement personnel, the process one uses to find and procure resources is the same. Also, the process an agency uses to warn the public will generally be the same. Capabilities-based planning focuses on a jurisdiction's capacity to take a course of action. Capabilities-based planning answers the question, do I have the right mix of training, organizations, plans, people, leadership and management, equipment, and facilities to perform a required emergency function? Core capabilities describe the types of activities that communities must address through the planning process. Core capabilities may be addressed through emergency support functions in an ESF format, or a jurisdiction may use an agency-centric approach to operation. These capabilities help the community frame the types of tasks they must accomplish during a disaster. Planning should include senior officials throughout the process to ensure both understanding and approval. Senior official awareness and support meets requirements of time management, planning horizons, simplicity, and level of detail. Planners must understand the level to which their senior leader wants to be involved in the planning process and adjust accordingly. Some senior leaders want to be a part of each step, while others want a briefing occasionally throughout the process. Whatever your senior leader prefers, it is critically important that your planning efforts incorporate your senior leaders. Planning should use a logical and analytical problem-solving process to help address the complexity and uncertainty inherent in responding to potential threats and hazards. By following a set of logical steps that includes gathering and analyzing information, determining operational objectives, and developing alternative ways to achieve the objectives, planning allows a jurisdiction to work through complex situations. The most important trait that an emergency manager can have is that of problem solver. Emergency managers are called on to analyze complex problems, propose reasonable solutions, and bring stakeholders to the table. This is the core function of emergency management and support of incident response. Plans should establish measurable goals and clearly identify the desired results. Measurable goals enable unity of effort and consistency of purpose among all who must execute the plan, and measurable goals make it possible to gauge progress and closing capability gaps. Measurable goals are also important in establishing a baseline and tracking progress in achieving your goals. Without a set of trackable goals, it is difficult to judge the effectiveness of a program or plan. Once measurable goals are established, planners are then able to develop objectives and strategies to meet the stated goals of the plan. Plans should identify tasks, allocate resources to accomplish those tasks, and establish accountability. Decision makers must ensure that they provide planners with clearly established priorities and adequate resources. Planners and plan participants should be held accountable for effective planning and execution. Accountability can be achieved by not only clearly assigning tasks to agencies, but also by including them in the planning process. Any agency assigned a task within the plan should have a chance to provide input and should help develop their roles and responsibilities within the plan. It is important to understand the planning environment. During the planning process, stakeholders have the opportunity to carefully consider the impact that a threat or hazard will have, and also to develop courses of action to resolve the consequences of that impact. The tasks developed in the planning process become the foundation of the plan itself. Anticipating the environment promotes early understanding and agreement on planning assumptions and risks, as well as the context for interaction. Additionally, in situations where a specific threat or hazard has not been experienced, planning provides the opportunity to anticipate conditions and systematically identify potential problems and workable solutions. Plans should be flexible enough to address both small-scale and catastrophic incidents. Scalable planning solutions are the most likely to be understood and executed properly by the operational personnel who have practiced in applying them. Regardless of the size of the incident, your plan should be flexible enough to respond to the incident's demand. With this in mind, the plan should address how your community's consequence management incident response efforts will integrate both horizontally across the organizations within your community and vertically to those organizations above and below yours. Planners should take advantage of the experience of other planners, as well as plans generated by other jurisdictions in the state. Available resources include state standards and guidance, FEMA-provided guidance and training, and plans produced by key infrastructure owners. While it is a good idea to leverage other resources to guide the planning process, planners should be careful using templates, which may preempt the planning process. This slide reviews the principles of planning presented in this section. Throughout this section, you learn considerations, including the whole community, the all hazards approach, core capabilities, and senior official needs. This section also presented on a number of problem-solving strategies, including creating measurable goals, accountability, anticipation of the environment, and creating plans that are scalable and flexible. Critical thinking involves more than the evaluation of sources of information. Data is indispensable. However, collecting data during an emergency delays response. Throughout the planning process, the planning team must think critically about the plan, tasks, and courses of action being developed for an operation. Actions must be based on sound analysis and select courses of actions that are based not on what has always been done, but rather must be grounded in evidence. A number of models and sources of analysis exist. These models are listed on the slide. Section 2 outlines the context, planning levels, and types of planning documents. This section reviews the focus and scope of planning efforts and helps planners determine what type of plan they want to write based on the needs of the community. This section also builds upon Section 1 in discussing the planning environment and the context for planning processes. Context is important for any planning project. With that in mind, in this section, we will consider the context in which emergency plans are written, identify types of plans made at different levels, and address interagency collaboration. The environment in which we plan can be uncertain. The need for planning originates from threats and hazards, mandates, or regulatory requirements. An agency might write a plan to solve a problem, or it might simply be required by an elected official or legislation. The planning process drives the ways in which agencies prepare for, respond to, and recover from disasters. While it is likely that plans will not be followed to the letter during a disaster, the planning process is where agencies develop relationships with key operational partners, and these relationships are critical to operational success. The planning process drives and is driven by agency coordination. Emergency and disaster plans are the playbook for agency response and management of consequences of a disaster. Planning is the first step in preparing for a disaster. The plan must be based on anticipated operations, the resources available to support the operations, and the actions agencies will take. Planning cannot occur in a vacuum, but rather needs to be a collaborative, contextual effort. Since emergency managers are not the subject matter experts for operations, it is critically important that planners engage all relevant stakeholders in the process. For example, an emergency manager wouldn't want to prescribe the ways road networks are managed. Rather, planners would want to engage the Department of Transportation in the planning process to receive their feedback. Plans must be integrated across the local, state, and federal levels to ensure the agencies at each level are able to coordinate and work together, and to ensure that plans do not conflict or depend on the same resources at the same time. For example, an evacuation plan might designate specific routes that conflict with a neighboring community evacuation route. This is why it is important to carefully consider who must be involved in your planning process as you set up the planning process and planning teams. It might make sense to not only include your community stakeholders, but also ensure representation from critical neighboring jurisdictions and agencies at other levels of government. These stakeholders should be part of the planning process in some degree. Take a moment to reflect on the challenges you have experienced in your planning processes. Have you had challenges with the environment, collaboration between stakeholders, or integrating plans and efforts across multiple levels of government? Within context, various types of plans are designed to meet strategic, operational, and tactical levels of response. Understanding the contextual differences between the levels of planning is important for anyone developing a plan. This figure illustrates the 3 levels of plans, starting with strategic plans being the most broad to tactical plans, which outline specific processes and tasks. Strategic plans focus on broad concepts, outline principles, and describe strategies for addressing an issue. Examples include strategic plans, concept papers, and other broad documents. Moving one level lower to the operational level, operational plans outline the broad support activities that organizations complete to support a disaster. Operational level planning is the level where emergency management activities typically resides. An emergency operation plan is a good example of a document at this level. Moving further down to the tactical level, tactical plans outline very specific procedures for completing individual tasks. Tactical planning typically resides at the incident management level. Examples of tactical plans include active shooter plans and cyber disruption plans. Each level of planning is discussed in further detail on the next few slides. Strategic planning, as mentioned, involves establishing priorities and strategies for an agency or an operation. Strategic level planning helps shape the context for operational and tactical operations. Senior officials and policymakers establish strategic objectives for an operation or an agency. The strategic objectives and strategic plans drive what operators do at an operational and tactical level. At the state level, the governor, MEMA executive director, and cabinet secretaries establish strategic objectives to drive consequence management and disaster risk reduction activities. Moving one level down, operations plans discuss the activities that must be accomplished in a broad sense and present a concept of operations that includes the general roles and responsibilities of response entities. Emergency operations plans are writing at the operational level since the activities of agencies with emergency management roles support incident managers and boots-on-the-ground efforts at the tactical level. Finally, at the tactical level, plans address specific tasks that must be accomplished during a disaster or emergency. Tactical plans describe the way a specific task is accomplished or the way in which agencies respond to a unique hazard. Tactical plans might address the way an agency sets up and runs a shelter, how an incident command post is established, or anything related to the boots-on-the-ground operations. Tactical plans focus on the management of personnel, equipment, and resources. Planning occurs before an incident and during an incident. Preparedness planning occurs before an incident begins or before a threat or hazard poses a direct threat to the community. Preparedness plans include contingency plans, which do not have a defined start time and likely feature numerous courses of action, and crisis action plans, which have a defined start date and typically have fewer courses of action. Planning occurring during an incident is referred to as operational planning. Planning for current operations might include developing an incident action plan, whereas planning for future operations involves examining the tasks and operations needed several operational periods in the future. As mentioned, preparedness planning occurs before an incident occurs. The characteristics of both contingency and crisis action plans are outlined on this slide. Contingency plans are developed for threats or hazards not currently impacting the community and do not have a defined start date. Examples include a hurricane contingency plan or cyber disruption plan. On the other hand, crisis action plans are developed for threats or hazards likely to impact the community at a defined time. The best example of a crisis action plan is a special event plan that is developed for a very specific period of time and meant to address that specific issue. Crisis action planning often features an environment with shorter time frames and less information, since these types of plans tend to be developed quickly in anticipation of an incident. While preparedness planning occurs before an incident occurs, operations planning takes place within an Emergency Operations Center, also referred to as an EOC, or at an incident command post during an operation. The most recognizable operation planning process is the Planning P, which ultimately leads to implementation of the Incident Action Plan. Operations planning, especially for current planning operations, typically focuses on the upcoming 12-hour operational period. Operations planning tends to be more granular, focusing on just the tasks needed for a short period of time. This slide reviews the key items discussed in this section, including context of planning and the types of plan that planners may be asked to produce. Section 3 provides an overview of the phases and steps within the Maryland Plan Development process. This section prepares planners to navigate the planning process and to lead a planning effort for any of the plan types discussed in the last section. The Maryland Plan Development Process, MPDP, provides guidance to streamline and strengthen planning in your jurisdiction or organization. The concepts discussed here are components of the MPDP and will be the basis of the classroom portion of this training. The MPDP offers a simple yet in-depth process that all Maryland jurisdictions can use to develop plans. The MPDP describes the steps planners take from conception to delivery of a ratified plan in 4 phases. The Maryland Plan Development process is comprised of 4 phases and a number of subsequent tasks that guide planners from project inception to completion. Phase 1 focuses on understanding the risk, conducting assessments of vulnerability, and establishing a planning team. Next, in Phase 2, planners determine the context of their plan, which includes developing the scope and the list of information needed to inform the planning process. In Phase 3, planners develop the plan, which includes developing courses of action, honing in on specific agency roles and responsibilities, and determining other key information, such as how the plan will be updated and maintained. Finally, once planners make it to Phase 4, the plan components are assembled, the plan is written, and the planning process ends with a robust training and exercise program. The following section will outline this process in much greater detail. Phase 1. Understand the risk. Phase 1 includes activities to understand the threat environment and the intent of senior leadership. The threat assessment includes forming a team to research threats, hazards, and risk to the jurisdiction through reviewing historical events and probabilities. Phase 1 culminates in a kickoff meeting with a core planning team, CPT, and an expanded planning team, EPT. More information on the planning teams will be provided later. The first step in the planning process is understanding senior leader intent. The senior leader in your organization provides the initial direction of the project and establishes goals and objectives for the project. This guidance may be vague, such as, write a cyber disruption plan, or very specific, such as, write a cyber disruption plan that outlines the specific notification processes in the state. Whatever the case, it is the role of the planning team to receive, interpret, and execute a planning process to satisfy this guidance. The extent to which your senior leader wishes to be involved in the process will vary. It is up to the planning team to clearly establish what level of involvement is desired and appropriate. For some projects, formal senior leader briefings throughout the process are appropriate, while others might prefer a periodic text message or email update at particular benchmarks. Early involvement of senior leadership in plan scoping is vital to the success of the project. Getting the project off to the desired start and in a direction congruent with senior leader intent is important. Early buy-in from senior leadership can also help encourage active participation and buy-in from agency partners. Meeting senior leader intent also can help avoid duplication of effort and wasted time conducting tasks not aligned with senior leader intent. Before kicking off the planning process, the planning team must conduct research on the topic. Additionally, the planning team members cannot be expected to be experts on all issues, and it is therefore important to leverage subject matter experts to help planners reach an understanding of the issue and inform the planning process. One component of understanding the risk is to examine past occurrences of the threat or hazard and analyze them based on new trends and data. For example, historical flooding from a hurricane might be more severe now with increased coastal development and the impacts of climate change and sea level rise. There are a number of resources available to the planning team, including federal databases, the Maryland IMAP portal, and the academic community. Examining both past occurrences and projected trends help the planning team understand the exact impact a threat or hazard will have on the community. After the team has a thorough understanding of the topic, the next step is to take the data and apply it to a formal risk assessment process. The overall risk for a particular threat or hazard is calculated by assigning values to and multiplying three factors: the threat, vulnerability, and consequences. The threat is the issue likely to impact the community. The vulnerability is how susceptible the community is to the impact. And the consequences are the issues that will be the result of the impact. After this analysis, the planning team will have a thorough understanding of how exactly the threat or hazard will impact the community, which will lead to more accurate courses of action later on in the process. Assembling the planning team is one of the most important steps in the planning process. The individuals on the planning team must represent the whole of community and all agencies that will play a role in an operation. The planning teams consist of a core planning team, expanded planning team, and a collaborative planning team. The makeup of each team and the frequency of meeting is discussed on the next slide. This slide further illustrates how the three planning teams work in concert during the planning process. The core planning team consists of the lead agency, which is typically emergency management, and usually the lead subject matter expert agency. The core planning team will meet frequently throughout the process. This might include daily communication and biweekly meetings. For example, for a cyber disruption planning effort, the Department of IT and Emergency Management will be part of this group. The expanded planning team includes a wider audience, including those key agencies who will be a part of the operation. Using the previous example, members of the expanded planning team would include other key players such as police, the Fusion Center, critical infrastructure providers, and information sharing partners. Moving one level more broad is the collaborative planning team. The collaborative planning team includes those agencies that need to be aware of the process but are not integral to the operation. Members of this team might include federal representatives, individuals from the private sector, and others who might be called upon during a disaster. Once planners have an understanding of the threat or hazard and have formed their planning team, they are ready to determine the plan context. This phase includes determining the plan's scope, objectives, and developing a mission statement. This phase also includes determining the critical information that will be needed to develop the plan. It is also in this phase where you will introduce the planning process to the collaborative planning team so they have awareness of the planning process and what the planning team has developed to date. Phase 2 sets the stage for the rest of the planning process. Fundamentally, setting the scope of the plan helps frame the entire planning process. The types of tasks and activities in a tactical plan will be drastically different than those of the strategic or operational plan. From this standpoint, it is absolutely critical to set the scope before proceeding with the planning process. It is within this phase where agencies firm up their understanding of the process. Before the planning team can develop the objectives, activities, and tasks, the scope of the plan must be defined. The plan might apply to one jurisdiction, a region, or the entire state. Additionally, the plan might apply to a single type of operation, such as sheltering or response to active assailant, or it might apply to a particular incident. The scope must be clearly defined in the introductory sections of the plan so the readers understand the context of the plan. The scope should consider aspects of the operation within the threat addressed by the plan. The plan's scope should also be concise, yet address pertinent details. The objectives justify writing the plan by identifying what the parties to the plan expect to accomplish during an operation. There are a number of ways to develop objectives, but at a minimum, they must be achievable and measurable. The planning team may wish to utilize the SMART principle when developing objectives. SMART objectives are simple, meaning they provide a specific target for the operations. Measurable, meaning they provide some quantitative way to measure progress. Achievable, meaning they are agreed upon and in line with the plan's goals. Realistic, meaning they can reasonably be accomplished. And time-oriented, meaning they specify when the objective will be complete. The mission statement is important in that all activities of the planning process and operations should align with the mission statement. The mission statement should encompass the primary objective of the plan, consider what a successful operation looks like, align with any legal requirements for operations, and drive all preparedness and operational activities. After determining the scope, objectives, and mission statement, it is time to develop information requirements for the planning process. At the heart of this step is developing a needs assessment, which includes a list of questions and information needed for the plan to succeed. For example, if the task is to develop an evacuation plan for a community, the planning team would want to know the size of the population, estimated evacuation times, resources available, and impediments to evacuation. Section 4 presents the final two phases of the Maryland Plan developing process: developing the plan itself and reviewing and approving the plan. Phase 3 involves developing the main components of the plan. It is during this phase that the plan is developed and compare the courses of action that agencies within their community will take during an incident. During this phase, planners may schedule individual meetings with the agency partners to refine their roles in the process. The following slides outline the individual steps and tasks within Phase 3 of the process. Once the planning team has an understanding of the plan mission, scope, and objectives, it is time to develop core functions. A review of the threats and needs of the leadership and the community set the context for the rest of the plan. It is important for the planning team to align the remainder of the planning process with the plan elements already developed. As noted previously, Phase 3 includes developing courses of action, developing agency roles and responsibilities, and determining administrative plan functions. Courses of action, COAs, are the tasks that must be accomplished for the plan to succeed. Essentially, COAs are how the mission statement is carried out. Depending on the scope and mission of the plan, there may be just one COA, or there may be multiple COAs. Additionally, your COAs might correspond to activation levels, such as partial or full, mission areas, such as prevention, response, or recovery, or categories specific to the operation. The range of potential COAs should be based on a number of factors including past operations, the nature of the threat, recommendations and corrective actions from previous incidents, the overall risk of an incident in the community within a time frame, and senior leader priorities. As multiple COAs are constructed, the plan itself begins to take shape. The COAs form the basis for the plan, and all COAs must align with previously developed plan sections, including purpose, scope, and objectives. When developing COAs, it is important that the planning team first generate a wide array of possible COAs for consideration. The planning team should develop COAs that are distinguishable among each other, feasible to accomplish the mission, and also able to be measured. COAs should be developed without preconceived notion in mind as to what the best COA is or what COA will work the best. Instead, after planners develop the list of possible COAs, they are evaluated based upon feasibility, legal issues, cost, COA precedent, and ability to accomplish the mission. There are a number of techniques and methods for evaluating COAs. We will review a number of these methods in the classroom portion of the course. When planners are conducting their evaluation of COAs, they should do so objectively as possible. Once the COAs are evaluated and scored, the list of COAs, along with their scores, is presented to the expanded planning team for discussion. The expanded planning team then selects the most appropriate COAs based on analysis for the inclusion in the plan. Once the expanded planning team agrees upon the COAs and general tasks for each COA, it is time to develop individual tasks for the agency, functions, or stakeholders involved in the plan. As noted earlier in the course, each agency that is part of the planning team brings to bear their own agency's capabilities and subject matter expertise. At this point, the planning team is ready to assign specific roles and tasks to agencies or functional components. This step must be a collaborative effort between all agencies within the expanded planning team. It is critically important to assign tasks to agencies or functions that have the ability to carry out the assigned tasks. It is also important to note that the extent to which the planning team develops tasks for each COA depends on how the emergency management system in the community operates. Like all other components of the planning process, this step should be tailored to meet the needs of the community. The key, however, is ensuring the critical operational partners are a part of the conversation and at the table as the plan is developed. We are now at the point in the process where it is time to develop some of the more administrative pieces of the plan. Some important functions must be decided at this point, including coming up with answers to the questions. What are the methods by which information will be shared if the plan is activated? How will information be managed when the plan is in use? When will the plan be updated and who will update it? This is especially important to consider in the case of contingency plans. And what is the method to train agencies on the plan and to test the plan? These and other remaining plan elements set the stage for the final steps in the process, where the planning team assembles the components developed so far in the plan development process and transform them into the actual plan. With over 3/4 of the planning process complete, it is time to develop the plan and move towards plan approval and dissemination. That means it is finally time to write. It is now up to the planning team to assemble everything that was developed up to this point, which forms the basis of the actual plan. When assembling the plan, the planning team should take particular care to ensure consistency throughout the document. Both consistency in the substantive portion of the plan, meaning the content should be consistent, and in the grammatical and structural elements. For example, headings, subheadings, fonts, spacing, and capitalization of terms should be applied consistently. To the extent possible, graphics and diagrams should also be included to illustrate key concepts and to explain complex components. Ultimately, the plan must look like a polished document before distribution for final review and comment. Once written, the document should undergo a 3-step internal review prior to release. First, a senior member of the agency should provide a technical edit of the plan, ensuring it meets all regulatory requirements, that the agency can support the plan, and that it does not conflict with other plans. After the technical edit is complete, the plan must undergo a formatting grammar review. This second step should be completed by someone who was not intimately involved in the development or writing of the plan. Additionally, an accessibility review should occur to ensure the plan is accessible and conforms to universal design standards, so that it can be read by people with disabilities and others with access and functional needs, such as people who use screen reader software to read documents. An example includes applying alt text to graphics and figures. The planning team should distribute the plan for review in PDF format. The PDF draft plan should be accompanied by a plan comment matrix to allow reviewers to offer comments in a singular format, making it easier for the planning team to review and adjudicate the comments. Comments are broken down into 4 categories, including C. Critical. This refers to the inclusion or exclusion of language that would result in a division non-concurring with the plan. S. Substantive. This refers to significant language changes that must be made to ensure the plan is complete, but would not result in non-concurrence. O. Observation/notes. These comments make observations on the plan but do not suggest specific wording changes. Lastly, A. Administrative. These are grammatically spelling or formatting errors identified in the plan. After all of the comment matrices are collected, the planning team begins the comment adjudication process. Once the planning team has adjudicated all comments, a final plan is produced and the collaborative planning team meets to discuss the final plan. Now that the plan has gone from conception to completion, it is time to have the senior leadership of the organization officially approve the plan. The goal is to have the agency director approve and sign the plan to officially adopt it. Most jurisdictions have a formal review and adoption process. The signing will typically coincide with a senior leader briefing. For plans with more than one lead agency, final approval and promulgation of the plan can be difficult. Planners should not overlook this important step in the process and should be aware that it may result in additional time before the plan can be implemented. Additionally, it can be logistically challenging to manage the signature process for plans with more than one signator. The planning team must consider the best way for going about this process, which may include physically delivering the plan for signature. The final signed plan should be digitized for distribution, and the original copy should be stored securely. Careful consideration must be given to how the plan will be shared with operational partners. Legal guidance regarding what should or should not be released beyond the planning team is appropriate to provide at this time. Generally, most plans can and should be shared with the public. However, some plans contain sensitive law enforcement information or other information that should not be widely disseminated. Therefore, when appropriate, it is acceptable to share a redacted version of the plan, where specialized appendices or pieces of information are withheld. At a minimum, the planning team should orient actors and stakeholders to the plan mission, scope, and objectives. This orientation is for members of all of the planning teams. A tabletop exercise that aligns with Homeland Security Exercise and Evaluation Program, known as HESIP standards, is the next logical step for the parties of the plan to participate in. The planning team can work with the Training and Exercise branch of the lead organization or Office of Emergency Management to develop the tabletop to test the plan. The goal of the tabletop exercise is to test the operational components of the plan and to deconflict roles and responsibilities. The last step in the Maryland Plan development process is to apply the plan. For crisis action plans, the plan becomes active when the first operational period begins. Contingency plans, however, do not have a defined start date. Thus, once the plan is complete, the plan enters into a systematic review and update cycle. This concludes your preparation for the classroom workshop portion of the Maryland Planners course. At this point, you have reviewed doctrine and principles and the types and levels of plans. You have also considered leadership challenges and experimented with team building and developing COAs.